The reason the Velhari asked me, specifically, to host their first planetary surface survey was that I was the least threatening xenobiologist at the Meridian Research Station, which is itself a fairly gentle way of saying I was the one they had heard complain the least. I should explain that. The Velhari had been in contact with Earth for 11 years by then, and in those 11 years they had developed a precise and well-documented taxonomy of the kinds of humans they found manageable. The taxonomy was not flattering. Manageable sat near the top. Below it came tolerable, and below that, loud. Most of the diplomatic staff fell somewhere between tolerable and loud. Most of the military liaisons were filed simply under a Velhari word. I was later told translated roughly, as those who opened doors too fast. I was manageable. My name is Dr. Elias Vance. I am 37 years old, I am 5'10". I have the kind of face that immigration officers wave through without really looking, and I have spent most of my adult life talking to things that could not talk back: soil samples, spectrograms, atmospheric cores from dead moons. I am not exciting. I do not open doors fast. I once spent 14 months at an outpost on Ganymede writing papers that 3 people read. One of those people was my mother, and she told me the title was confusing. I mention all of this because when Coordinator Veltan of the Velhari Interspecies Survey Division asked whether I would be willing to host a 2-person scientific delegation for a 6-week surface stay in the Sonoran Desert, she described it as a matter requiring a stable human. She said this while looking at the rest of my department. Then she looked at me. Then she said, "You will do." I said yes. I am, apparently, the kind of man who says yes when a 7-foot diplomat with silver hair and eyes the color of a solar eclipse tells him he will do. The delegation arrived on a Tuesday. The shuttle was a Velhari courier class, matte white with the faint bioluminescent trim that their ships used instead of running lights. It landed on the pad outside the research station with the kind of precision that made human pilots quietly furious. No corrections, no wobble, just a clean vertical drop onto the center mark as if the pad had reached up and caught it. The ramp extended, 2 figures descended. I had met Velhari before, several at the station, a few at the Nairobi Accord talks 2 years prior, but I had not met these Velhari, and there was a moment, watching them walk down the ramp into the morning desert sun, where I forgot what I was supposed to be doing. They were twins, that was the first thing. Identical in height and bone structure, both running somewhere just shy of 6 feet, which was shorter than most Velhari I had encountered but still enough to make me aware of my own approximate dimensions. Their skin was the pale silver green that Velhari called Vethal, the shade of old leaves under moonlight, though in the direct Arizona sun it caught something warmer, a faint gold undertone that the briefing files had not mentioned, and that I spent several seconds trying to reconcile with what I thought I knew about their biology. Their ears were the marker everyone fixated on when describing Velhari: long, tapered, swept back and slightly upward, the tips rising a good 3 inches above where a human ear would end. They moved with those ears the way humans moved with eyebrows, small involuntary tilts and angles that I had been trying to learn to read for 3 years without notable success. Their hair was white, not the white of age, the clean, almost blue white of fresh snow, worn long and pulled back in identical braided configurations that I recognized from the briefing materials as the style indicating active research mode, which apparently was a real category for them and not a metaphor. Their eyes were amber, wide-pupilled in the way all Velhari eyes were, the iris filling most of the visible surface, giving them the look of people who could see things you had not noticed yet, which, as I would learn, was often true. The first one down, the ramp looked around at the desert with an expression I could not read. The second one looked at me. "Dr. Vance," she said, Her accent was the careful, almost too precise English that Velhari linguists produced, every consonant placed like a deliberate footstep. I am Senior Researcher Alith Vel Sarin. This is my sister, Junior Researcher Kalith Vel Sarin. She paused. We appreciate your willingness to accommodate our survey. Happy to, I said, which was true. How was the transit? Efficient, she said. She looked at the sky, then at the ground, then at me again. We have reviewed your surface protocols. We have several questions. Of course. The first is about the light. I waited. Our instruments indicate that your local star's UV output in this region is currently at index 7.4. She said this the way someone might note that the building was on fire. This is higher than any environment our species has conducted extended surface work in. Our protective suits are rated for sustained exposure at index 5 and intermittent exposure at 7, but index 7.4 sustained is outside the design parameters. I looked at the sky. It was a clear June morning in the Sonoran Desert, which meant it was going to be approximately the temperature of the inside of a toaster by noon. The UV was exactly what it always was. I see, I said. What suits are you planning to wear? Standard Velhari Type II survey suits. Full spectrum coverage, reflective outer layer, integrated cooling. Those should be fine, I said, because they should have been. The Type II was, by any measure I was aware of, better engineered than anything we put our own field teams in. Alith looked at me. Then she looked at my clothing. I was wearing cargo pants, a light linen shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat, which I had put on because I was standing in the desert and that was what you wore. She said carefully, "You are not in a protective suit." "No," I said. A very long pause. "Dr. Vance," she said, "the UV index is 7.4. Yes. You are exposed." "I have sunscreen on," I said, and then, because she was looking at me like I had just told her I was breathing seawater, I added, SPF 50. It blocks most of the UV, and the hat covers my face. She turned to look at her sister. Kalith looked back. Some rapid exchange happened at the level of ear movement that I could not follow, but the general texture of it, as far as I could read alien body language at that point in my life, was something like, "Did he just say what I think he said? I believe so. Is he going to die? I genuinely cannot determine this." "You apply a chemical coating," Alith said at last, "to your skin, and this is sufficient. Combined with the hat, yes. You do not require a suit. Not for this UV level, no. A hat and sunscreen and staying hydrated is the standard approach." She looked at her sister again. The ears did something I would come to recognize as the Velhari equivalent of raised eyebrows. A slow, deliberate tilt outward and up, held for about 2 seconds. "I see," Alith said, in a voice that indicated she did not in fact see, but had decided to proceed on the assumption that I was not about to die. "The second question," Kalith said. It was the first time she had spoken, and I noted that her accent had slightly different rhythms from her sister's, a little more careful on the vowels, "concerns the surface temperature. Our instruments project a midday ground temperature of approximately 54 degrees Celsius in direct sun." "That's right," I said. "We'll work mornings and late afternoons. Midday we stay inside." "And your cooling system," she said, "it is internal." I thought about this for a second. "You mean, do I sweat?" "Your body regulates core temperature through evaporative surface moisture. Yes, we read that in the xenobiological files." She paused. It seemed improbable. "It works," I said. "I'll drink a lot of water and I'll be fine." The ears again, both of them this time, an outward tilt that lasted 3 full seconds. I got the impression that the next 6 weeks were going to be interesting. I should say something about what the Velhari were actually there to do, because it matters for what happened later. The Velsarin sisters were comparative planetologists with a secondary specialty in what their academy called convergent habitability theory. The study of how different worlds, shaped by different suns and different geologies, sometimes arrived at similar biological outcomes through entirely different paths. They were particularly interested in arid environments, deserts, high-altitude scrub, salt flats, the kind of places where life had to work very hard to be there at all. Aelith was the lead researcher. She was 3 years older than Calith, which, in Velhari terms, meant she had completed 3 additional years of the Velsaran academic track, and she carried herself with the particular precise energy of someone who had been told she was right about things often enough to believe it and wrong about things often enough to know to check. She had a notebook, a physical one, bound in something that was not leather but had the same weight to it, in which she wrote constantly. I never asked what she wrote. I had the sense it would have taken a long time to explain. Calith was the question asker. Where Aelith observed and recorded, Calith interrogated. She asked questions the way some people breathe steadily, without particular drama, but also without stopping. By the end of the first day, I had answered questions about the formation of the Sonoran Desert, the local ecology, the life cycle of the saguaro cactus, why the saguaro cactus had spines when it was large enough that most predators could not eat it anyway, what the coyotes were for, how long coyotes lived, whether coyotes experienced something analogous to grief, what I personally thought about grief, and why humans named things after the Roman pantheon when the Romans were no longer a political entity. That last one had come at dinner, over rice and beans that I had made on a camp stove, because the station's kitchen was still being calibrated for their dietary requirements. She had been looking at the stars. Orion, she said, pointing, your mythology. The hunter. That's right. Why a hunter? It does not look like a hunter. It doesn't look like anything in particular, I said. Humans are pattern-seeking. We find shapes in randomness. The Greeks needed stories that went with the shapes they found. Your species finds patterns in noise, she said, not like a criticism, more like noting an interesting datum, and then builds stories from the patterns. That's essentially it. What pattern do you find in that constellation, personally? I looked at Orion, belt, shoulders, feet, the familiar geometry of 10,000 winter nights. An hourglass, I said. That's what I actually see, an hourglass, but I was told it was a hunter, so I see both. Calith looked at me for a long moment. Then she wrote something in her own notebook, a smaller one than her sister's with a clasp. I asked her what she wrote. She said a note about the hourglass, and did not elaborate. It happened on day 4 during the morning survey run. We had established a good rhythm by then. Up before dawn, field work from first light until 10 or 10:30, then back to the station before the heat became impractical. The sisters wore their tie-pi suits, which were, I had to admit, impressive pieces of engineering, light enough to move in, reflective enough to drop the effective surface temperature by a meaningful amount, with integrated sensors that fed constant biometric data to a wrist display. They were more prepared for the desert than most human researchers I had worked with. I was wearing the hat. It was day 4, approaching 9 in the morning, UV index climbing toward 8 as the sun got higher. We were maybe 2 kilometers from the station, doing core sample work at a site near a dry riverbed where the geological record went back about 40,000 years. Aelith was running the core sampler. Calith was cataloging the extracted samples. I was taking atmospheric readings at 5-meter intervals because that was the data point I had been assigned, and also because it gave me an excuse to move around, which I preferred to standing still. I had removed my hat about 20 minutes earlier because I was hot and the hat, while useful, was also warm. This was not a considered decision. I had simply gotten warm and taken off the hat and put it in my pack and kept working. About 10 minutes after that, I noticed Calith watching me. Not cataloging, watching. I looked up, everything okay. Your hat, she said. What about it? You removed it approximately 9 minutes ago. I know. The UV index at this location and time, she said, is approximately 8.1. I know. And you are not concerned. I thought about this. My neck was getting some sun. My forearms were definitely getting some sun. I had rolled up my sleeves 2 days prior and not really rolled them back down. Not particularly, I said. I'll put the hat back on in a bit. My scalp burns faster than the rest of me. A pause that lasted long enough for me to take 2 more atmospheric readings. You are aware, Caliph said, very carefully, that your skin is experiencing direct exposure to UV index 8.1. Yes. And you are aware that our suits register this level as a biohazard condition, requiring immediate shelter protocols. Yes, I know the suits read it that way. But you are fine. I'm getting a bit of color, I said. I'll use more sunscreen at the next break. She turned to Alith. Alith had been listening without looking up from the core sampler. She looked up now. The ear movement between them lasted about 4 seconds. I had learned enough by day 4 to read the rough shape of it. Something like he said he is fine, he has been in this light for 23 minutes without a suit. I know, is this normal? I believe so / how. Alith put down the core sampler and walked over to me. She was carrying a small instrument I recognized as a spectrometer, the kind used for surface analysis. She pointed it at my arm. May I? She said. Sure, I said. She ran it across my forearm slowly, looked at the reading, ran it again, looked at it again for a very long time. Your skin, she said, is reflecting approximately 31% of incident UV radiation and absorbing the remainder. About right, I said. Human skin is not great at UV reflection. That's why sunscreen exists. But you are not experiencing tissue damage. Not immediately, I said. I'll have a tan in a few days. If I stay out long enough without protection, I'll burn, and that's unpleasant and increases cancer risk over the long term, but 6 hours in moderate UV without sunscreen isn't going to hurt me. Your skin is absorbing UV index 8 radiation, Alith said, and converting it. Well, partly. It damages melanin, and the melanin response is to produce more, that's the tan. And the UV synthesizes vitamin D, which we need. That part's actually useful. The sisters looked at each other. Then Caliph said slowly, your skin uses the radiation. Some of it, yes. To produce a vitamin. Yes. The silence that followed lasted long enough for a red-tailed hawk to cross the sky above us and disappear behind the ridge to the east. I watched it go. When I looked back, both of them were looking at their wrist displays, then at me, then at their wrist displays again. Dr. Vance, Alith said, the Velhari home world orbits at nearly twice Earth's solar distance. Our sun is a Class K star. The UV environment we evolved in is approximately 4% of what you are experiencing right now. I know, I said. It's in your biology files. That's part of why you need the suits. Sustained UV exposure at index 2 causes significant cellular stress in Velhari physiology, she said. At index 4, we would experience burns within 30 minutes. At index 8, unprotected exposure for more than 90 seconds would cause first-degree radiation burns. She paused. We would not be standing here without the suits. I understand, I said. You, she said, have been standing here for 23 minutes, without a suit, at index 8, and your body is using the radiation to make a vitamin. I put my hat back on, mostly because her description of the situation had made me feel mildly guilty about my cavalier approach to sun safety. I should use more sunscreen, I said. Caliph made a sound that I had not heard a Velhari make before. It was short, a controlled exhale through the nose, and it took me a moment to identify it. When I did, I was startled because it was the Velhari equivalent of a suppressed laugh. That evening, while I was writing up the day's atmospheric data, I heard Aelith speaking on her communicator in the next room. The walls of the station were not thick. I was not trying to eavesdrop. I simply could not avoid hearing it. Her Velhari was too fast for me to follow, but I caught a few words Vethsal, which I knew meant something like surface exposure, and Velnari, which the dictionary file gave as solar adaptation, and then a phrase I did not know at all, Alvine Thisith, which she repeated twice. When she came out to get water, I asked her what it meant. She looked at me for a moment. It is an old Velhari saying, she said, approximately, the stone that bathes in fire without burning. And that's me. I was describing the phenomenon, she said, which was a diplomatic answer. I am not immune to the sun, I told her. I can burn. I can get skin cancer from too much exposure over too many years. I'm just not immediately harmed by it the way you would be. You absorb it and continue, she said. Yes. She considered this for a moment. Then she said, on Velhari Prime there is a class of deep desert organism, a lichen, essentially, though the taxonomy differs, that grows on the sun-facing sides of volcanic rock formations. The temperature reaches 60 degrees Celsius on those surfaces. The organism has no cooling mechanism. It simply persists. The research consensus was that it must have some chemistry we had not identified, because the alternative, that it had simply evolved to exist in conditions that should destroy it, seemed improbable. She paused. The alternative was correct. And I'm the lichen, I said. You are the lichen, she said. I thought about this. That might be the most interesting way anyone has ever described my relationship with the sun. She went to get her water. When she reached the doorway, she stopped without turning around and said, "It was meant as admiration, Dr. Vance." Then she went to bed. I sat there for a while. The survey expanded to a second site in week 2, a higher elevation location about 40 minutes by rover from the station, in the shadow of a ridge that held its own microclimate, fractionally cooler, slightly more humid, and rich in the type of strata the sisters had come specifically to study. We spent most of our field hours there through weeks 2 and 3. By week 3, the rhythm had settled into something comfortable. I knew which questions Calith would ask before she asked them, not because I was particularly intuitive, but because she was systematic, and once you understood her system, you could see the question coming from 2 or 3 observations away. I knew that Aelith preferred silence during active measurement, but was happy to discuss methodology at length during transit. I knew that both of them found the sunrises important in some way they had not explained. They always watched them, standing together, sometimes speaking quietly in Velhari, sometimes not speaking at all. I had started learning more Velhari. Not fluently, not even close, but enough to follow rough sentences when they spoke to each other, and enough to occasionally say something in their language that was grammatically correct, which they both found disproportionately delightful in a way that I found quietly gratifying. I also noticed, around week 2 and into week 3, that the distance Aelith maintained in conversation had changed. It was subtle, she was a precise person, and her manners were consistently formal, but the distance had shifted from polite professional cautious to something closer to precise but warm, and I was aware of this in the way you are aware of a change in air pressure before weather comes. Calith had no such subtlety. By week 2, she had adopted the habit of falling into step beside me during the morning walk to the field site and maintaining a running commentary on whatever she was observing, which ranged from geological formations to the behavior of the local bird population to philosophical observations about the nature of convergent evolution. I mostly listened. Occasionally I answered. When I answered well, she would tilt her ears in the outward-upward configuration that I now knew meant something between interesting and yes, exactly that. And I had, embarrassingly, started to look forward to those tilts, the way I had once looked forward to a paper being accepted. On a Thursday in week 3, We were at the high site when a dust storm came in earlier than the forecast predicted. The forecasting in the Sonoran in summer is not a precise science, and we had about 20 minutes warning on the radio before it arrived. We got the equipment packed and covered, and then there was a 40-minute window where we were waiting it out in the rover, myself and Caliph, because Alith had stayed at the station that morning with a recalibration task that had overrun. The dust moved in red-brown walls to the south and west. The rover shuddered in the wind. Caliph sat beside me in the passenger seat, watching through the scratched windscreen with what I read as genuine fascination rather than concern. "Your world does this often," she said. "Dust storms, in this season in this region, yes, every week or two, sometimes more. And your structures withstand them." "They're built for it," I said. "The station will be fine. This is a moderate one." She was quiet for a moment. The wind was loud against the roof. "It is beautiful," she said. I looked at the storm. Red-brown columns twisting under a yellow sky, the sun a flat white disk above it, the ridge to our north standing clear while the desert below it disappeared into the moving haze. I had seen 100 of these and I found them beautiful too, but I had forgotten slightly that you could find them beautiful if you saw them for the first time. "It is," I said. "I would like to study them," she said. "The atmospheric dynamics, the particulate composition. There are desert storms on Velhari Prime, Velorath, but they are different in character. Different geology, different atmosphere. I wonder if the convergent forms are similar despite the different drivers." "You could propose a follow-up survey," I said, "if the first one goes well." She turned and looked at me. The light in the rover was dim, the storm cutting most of the incoming sun, and in the lower light her eyes were different. The amber pupils wider, more of the iris visible, a faint luminescence that I had not noticed before because I had mostly been seeing her in bright daylight. "Would you be the host researcher again?" she said. "I would try to be," I said, "if they asked me." She looked back at the storm. After a moment she said, "I hope they ask you." The wind pushed hard against the rover, rocking it slightly. The dust moved through the gulch below us in a long red curtain, and the saguaros stood in it like they always stood in everything. Indifferent, spined, absurdly durable. "The stone that bathes in fire without burning," I said. Caliph looked at me, and this time the expression was not the Velhari scientific reading a datum look, but something quieter and more direct. "You remembered that," she said. "I found it interesting. It was about you." "I know, that's why I found it interesting." The ear tilt outward and upward, sustained for longer than usual, and something else in her expression, the wide amber eyes steady on me, not cataloging or assessing, just present. "It was also meant as admiration," she said, in case that was unclear. It was her sister who had said it was meant as admiration 3 weeks ago. I noted this, that Caliph was repeating it now, deliberately in the same phrasing. I did not comment on it. I just nodded and watched the storm. The second incident, the one that the sisters apparently reported at length, if Alith's later explanation was accurate, happened on day 31. We were doing a late afternoon sample run, the light going golden and long, the temperature finally dropping to something comfortable. I was on the far end of the site, running the atmospheric probe at the final 3 stations, when I slipped on a loose section of shale and caught myself on my hands. I said something unrepeatable, looked at my palms, scraped, bleeding lightly, the kind of minor fall that every field researcher sustains at some point and treats with the same mild irritation you would give a software error. I got up, checked my equipment, and started walking back toward where the sisters were working. Alith saw me coming, and the ears went up instantly, both of them. A sharp upward cant that I had learned was alert/concern. "You are bleeding," she said. "Slipped on shale," I said. "I'm fine." "You require medical attention." I require a wet wipe and maybe a bandage, I said. I have both in my kit. She was already holding her wrist display toward me. The display showed my biosigns, which the station tracked passively via the sensor mesh I wore on field days. Heart rate normal, respiration normal, temperature normal. It showed two small red indicators at the palms, the suit sensors flagging surface tissue damage. The damage indicators are elevated, she said. They are correctly elevated, I said. I have 2 scraped palms. The indicators are doing their job. The protocol for biohazard events at this field classification is immediate site evacuation and medical assessment. A scraped palm is not a biohazard event, I said, which I realized as I said it might sound dismissive, so I added, I promise, this is genuinely minor. Human bodies do this all the time. We fall. We scrape ourselves. We patch it up and keep working. Kalith had come over. She was looking at my hands with the focused attention she gave to interesting rock formations, which I found faintly funny. You bleed, she said. Everyone bleeds, I said. Velhari healing factors require, she stopped, started again. Our recovery from surface tissue damage is slower than yours. The files indicate humans close small surface wounds within days. Hours to days, depending on size, I said. This will be mostly closed by morning. The two of them looked at each other. I was getting better at reading the ear exchanges. This one said something like, hours. That is what the files indicate. I thought that was a translation error. So did I. Let me see the kit, Aelith said. I got out the first aid kit. She examined it with the same methodical interest she gave to geological samples. The antiseptic wipe, the bandages, the small tube of topical antibiotic. She read the label on the antibiotic. This is a topical antimicrobial, she said. Yes. You apply it to open tissue. Yes. And then close the wound mechanically, and then your body does the rest. And then my body does the rest, I said. I cleaned the scrapes, applied the antibiotic, put on bandages. The whole operation took 4 minutes. Aelith watched the entire process without speaking. When I was done, she said, May I take a biometric reading? Sure, I said. She ran the wrist display scanner over my hands, looked at the data, made a small sound, a low Velhari hum, the equivalent I had come to understand of well then. Your inflammatory response is already active, she said. It starts fast, I said. The repair process is pretty efficient. You are using the injury, she said, which was exactly the same phrasing she had used 3 weeks ago about the UV. Using the radiation. Now, using the injury. I had the sense she was building a framework, a way of understanding human physiology through a single organizing principle, and I found the framework genuinely charming. Your immune system goes in, I said, seals it, builds the new tissue. It's not elegant, but it's fast. It is remarkably fast, she said. Your body doesn't do this. Velhari healing is more precise but slower. We do not inflame. We rebuild, but the process takes longer. We do not fall down on shale and return to work the same afternoon. She paused. We fall down on shale and take 2 days off. I might take a shorter afternoon, I said, but mostly because my knees hurt. The ear tilt, then from Aelith, the knees are also fine. The knees are fine, I said. I bruise easily. That's tomorrow's problem. She looked at me for a long moment, and I noticed that the expression was the same one I had seen from Kalith in the rover during the dust storm, not the scientific reading a datum look, but something quieter, something that was considering me as a particular thing, not a datum category. You are very difficult to damage, she said. I'm really not, I said, because I genuinely wasn't by any objective measure. I'm about as fragile as humans come. I don't exercise enough. I've broken 2 ribs in the field over the years. My vision is corrected. I need 8 hours of sleep. I'm not exceptional. You are standing in a desert at index 7.9, she said, with scraped hands that are already healing, telling me you are not exceptional. That's just normal, I said. Dr. Vance, she said, and there was something different in her voice, a specificity to the way she said my name. I have spent 6 years studying convergent habitability theory. I have read the xenobiological files on 17 documented species. I have never read a species whose physiological notes contain the phrase, absorbs stellar radiation, and synthesizes essential nutrients in the same document that described sustained physical labor at ambient temperatures unsuitable for most biological life. And now I am watching you manage a tissue injury with something called a wet wipe. I looked at her. You are exceptional, she said, for a wet wipe species. I laughed. I could not help it. It was the most formally delivered compliment I had received in years, and also possibly the strangest, and she said it with the complete precision of someone stating a conclusion they had reached through proper empirical process, and I laughed. Aleth's ears did the tilt, not the scientific one, a slower, softer configuration that I had not seen before and could not fully read. Caleth made the suppressed laugh sound. We went back to work. Week 6 came too soon. It always does when you are not ready for it. The sisters finished their data collection on day 39 and spent days 40 through 42 doing analysis at the station. I helped where I could, mostly as a resource for Earth-side context, for cross-referencing against the geological database, for explaining idioms when their translation software produced something that was technically accurate but made no practical sense. Caleth asked me, on day 40, what the phrase comparing apples to oranges meant, because it had appeared in a reference paper, and she had taken it literally and been confused for 20 minutes. I explained it, she wrote it down. Then she said, we have a similar saying in Velhari, Velnath sa Velnath, counting one kind of star against another, the same function. Convergent idiom, I said. The ear tilt, yes, exactly that. The analysis work was quieter than the field work, but not less interesting. I sat across the table from Aleth for 3 hours on day 41 while she worked through the high-elevation core samples, and we did not talk much, but the silence was comfortable in the way that silences are comfortable when you have been in them together enough times to stop filling them. On day 42 evening, we ate dinner outside for the first time. I had been cautious about the sisters' suit requirements, but Caleth had pointed out correctly that sunset UV in late June in the Sonoran was within their unprotected tolerance range. So we ate outside with the suits off, sitting on the flat rock shelf behind the station, and the sky went through the colors it goes through in the desert, orange to amber to a deep violet that the stars came through slowly at first and then all at once. Aleth named Velhari star designations for several of the brighter ones. I named the human ones where I knew them. There was, it turned out, significant overlap in the stars we both considered landmarks, the same anchor points, named for entirely different things. Rigel, I said, Velhari designation. Velarath Soren, Aleth said, the third anchor of the outer path, navigation reference. We use it as navigation too, I said. Different names, same function. She looked at the star. Convergent astronomy. The universe is not very large, Caleth said from my other side, relative to the number of minds looking at it. I thought about that for a long time. The shuttle was scheduled for first light on day 43. I was up before dawn, which I always was in the field, the desert habit of early rising having settled into me over 3 months. I made coffee and brought a cup outside, and Aleth was already there. She was in her suit, the full tie-pi-I, which made sense given the temperature, but there was something different about seeing it now compared to day 1. On day 1, it had read as the correct and necessary protective equipment for a species that could not stand in my desert without it. Now it read differently. as evidence of a different kind of toughness, the toughness of preparation rather than absorption, the toughness of a species that had figured out how to go places they had not been designed for and done so by being meticulous about it. "You are up early," she said. "I always am," I said. "Coffee?" She looked at the cup and then at me and then she said, "Yes." It was the first time she had said yes to coffee. It was the first time she had been offered it, but still. I went back inside and made her a cup, half strength with more water because Velhari caffeine metabolism was different, and brought it out. She wrapped both hands around it. In the suit, with the gloves, it was a different kind of gesture than a human holding a cup of coffee. She was not really feeling the warmth, but she held it anyway. "We have completed the data collection," she said. "I know. The preliminary findings are significant. The strata at the high site are older than projected. There is evidence of a wet period approximately 30,000 years ago that is not present in the existing literature." "That's a real discovery," I said. "We will need to return," she said. "The follow-up survey will take, I estimate, 4 to 6 weeks. Similar structure." "I'd recommend the same site approach," I said. "Morning field work, off-site at midday, high-elevation location every third day." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The sky was beginning to lighten, the horizon going from black to deep violet. "We will request you as the host researcher." "I'd like that," I said. "You do not have to say that," she said. "I know." She looked at the horizon. "You will burn in the first week," she said. "You always move the hat before you should." I laughed. "That's true." "I have SPF 70 in my personal kit," she said. "If the follow-up survey is arranged, I will bring it." "I have SPF 50. 50 is insufficient for your behavior patterns," she said, with the precise matter-of-fact firmness she gave to empirical conclusions. "I will not argue with that," I said. "Good." A pause. "Dr. Vance." "Elias," I said. We had been doing this every 3 days or so. I offered my first name. She went back to the formal address. I had decided to keep trying. She looked at me. Then she said, "Elias." Just that, my name in her voice, with that Velhari precision that placed each syllable like a deliberate footstep. "You have been a patient and attentive host," she said. "The data we have gathered here is among the most significant of my career." And she stopped, started again. I did not anticipate enjoying this survey. The files I reviewed before arrival described the Sonoran Desert as an extreme environment and the Earth's surface protocol as demanding. I expected it to be difficult. "It is difficult," I said, "for most people." "You made it less difficult," she said. "Not the environment, you." She looked at her coffee cup, which she was still holding. "That is what I wanted to say. I am not a practiced at saying non-empirical things. But that is what I wanted to say." The sun broke over the eastern ridge. The light went orange across the desert floor, catching the saguaro and the brittle brush and the red rock like something lit on purpose. The UV would climb to 6 by mid-morning, 7:05 by noon, 8 by early afternoon. Aelith's suit adjusted its opacity slightly as the light increased. I put on my hat. "Thank you," I said, "for the lichen comparison." She turned. The amber eyes were steady on me. "Alvine Thiseth," she said, "the stone that bathes in fire without burning." "I'll take it," I said. "I know," she said. And then she finally drank the coffee. Calith found me 20 minutes later, while I was helping load the equipment cases into the shuttle cargo bay. "Elias," she said. She had adopted my first name on day 6 and never gone back, which was very Calith. "I have a final question." "Of course," I said. "When we return for the follow-up survey," she said, "it will be a longer engagement, 6 weeks minimum. The station has adequate facilities for 2 researchers and 1 host." "It does," I said. "I am asking," she said, "because my sister does not ask, but she is wondering." She said this with the exact same calm tone she used for every question, from why does the saguaro have spines to do humans experience grief. Caliph treated all inquiries as equally worthy of the same systematic approach. She has been wondering for 3 weeks. I thought about this, about the silence on day 41, about the coffee cup, about the name said precisely, like a footstep placed deliberately. Tell her she should ask, I said. Whatever she is wondering, she should ask. Caliph tilted her ears, the long, sustained outward configuration that meant something in the range of yes, exactly that, correct answer. I will tell her, she said. She will pretend she does not know what I am referring to. I know, I said. You are very difficult to confuse, Caliph said, with genuine appreciation. I have been told I'm easy to read. You are not easy to read, she said. You are easy to understand. That is different. Most humans in the files are legible but not understandable. You are both. She picked up a case and carried it to the ramp with the efficiency she brought to everything. Stopped at the ramp. Looked back. Also, she said, SPF 70. My sister was correct. 50 is insufficient for your patterns. I have documented the data. I believe you, I said. Good, she said. We will see you in 4 months. I found out later, 4 months later, when Alith told me over the communication channel as I was reviewing the follow-up survey prep files, what the formal report to the Velhari Interspecies Survey Division had said about the Earth surface study. Specifically, she told me about the section on host environment and species interactions, which had contained, she said, the following note under xenobiological observations. Earth species Homo sapiens demonstrates a degree of unprotected UV tolerance, thermal resilience, and wound recovery velocity that is not accurately represented in the existing xenobiological files. Recommended update. Current documentation category, moderate UV sensitivity, temperature management required, should be revised to self-regulating with functional chemical and melanin UV adaptation, capable of sustained surface activity in conditions categorized as biohazard class for 11 of 13 surveyed species. The host researcher, Dr. E. Vance, remained in operational capacity throughout the survey period in conditions that would have required medical evacuation for a Velhari researcher without suit support. This was noted repeatedly and is documented across field logs 41 through 58. She read this to me over the communication channel in her precise, careful English. When she finished, there was a pause. I have a note appended at the end, she said. What does it say? The host researcher was also patient, curious, and not loud. That is classified as a separate observation category. I see, I said. The Division Council has approved the follow-up survey, she said. I am told you have confirmed availability. I have, I said. Good, a pause. I have the SPF 70. I checked the UV projections for the survey window. You will need it. I accept the SPF 70, I said. Wise, she said. Alith, I said. A pause. In the pause, I could hear her breathing, steady, Velhari, not quite the same rhythm as human breathing, but close enough that I had stopped noticing the difference around day 15. Yes, she said. I'm glad it was you, I said, that they sent. The pause that followed was longer, long enough that I checked the channel was still open. I asked, she said at last, to be assigned to this survey. The Velhari prime arid strata were specifically within my research focus, and I have been requesting a surface study site on Earth for 4 years. But I asked to be assigned to this specific host station, with this specific host researcher, after reading your publication on Ganymede atmospheric cores. 3 people read that paper, I said, startled. I was one of them, she said. The paper was not exciting, but the methodology was careful and the conclusions were honest and the writing was not confusing. I thought about my mother saying the title was confusing. I did not mention this. "I am glad it was you also," she said. "That you were here." The communication channel hummed with distance between us, 4 light months and change, and the amber eyes I had last seen watching the desert sunrise were somewhere in that distance, in a ship or on a station or at a desk in a building I had never seen. And in 4 months I would stand on the flat rock shelf behind the station with 2 cups of coffee and watch the sun come over the eastern ridge. At index 7.4 climbing. My hat would be in my pack before 10. And that, I suspected, would be documented in field log 1. And